Let's talk about different platforms. When you're designing mobile applications, it's better to keep in mind who you're designing them for. It means that who is the target audience, what platform, what device they're using. And if you understand that the huge amount of your target audience are iPhone users, so it's better than to focus on iOS. If you understand that most of the people who will be using this mobile application are Android users, so focus on this first and then adapt for another platform. But if you don't understand, for example, who your target audience is, what they're using, or like anyone can use for absolutely any platform, then I recommend you to use the customized approach where you take the best from both Android and iOS, understand what will work best for this particular application, and design it keeping in mind the guidelines that Material Design by Google provides you and Human Interface guidelines provided by Apple. Here you see three different screens. Well, basically same idea, but three different styles. The first one is for Android based on Material 3 design system that was created by Google a long time ago. They present material design first, and the main idea behind material design is that everything that you are using in mobile application is basically like a material. And this material, the base for the material was paper. And that was a really incredible idea. So every single time when you design something, you kept in mind that physical approach, that you have material like a piece of paper, and how this piece of paper will behave when you, for example, touch it, when you connect two pieces of paper, when you divide them, when you fold them. It was an incredible idea that you have something physical on the background, and based on that, you understand how to design. Honestly, since then, not much changed, but they switched a little bit to more, I would call it maybe flexible or soft approach. So today they have more rounded corners, less shadows, and at the same time, it's called Material 3, but now this material is something a little bit softer than piece of paper. But you can still keep in mind the material design approach, that this is material. And the same way as material behaves, let's imagine that I have a piece of paper that has navigation. If I put another piece of paper that will have additional content, then this piece of paper, the background, will be exactly on the back of our navigation. So navigation will be in front. And the same, you keep in mind that, okay, and what if I have my title section? Then this top navigation will also be in front of your content area. And when you keep in mind all these layers, then it will be much easier for you to design something. Let's imagine you decided like, oh, now I need a model screen. Model screen is something that appears, pops up. That's why they called pop-up screens as well. They appear in front of absolutely everything. And because they are so close to you, the idea behind it that this piece of paper with the content is so close to you that you don't see enough the background. And because of that, the background can be, you can have an overlay, dark overlay, so it will hide the background and you will be focused only on this card, this paper that appears in front of you. So when you're designing Android applications, keep it in mind. And also my recommendation to you, go and check Google if you want to, Material 3 design guidelines, and learn them. This is the first advice that I would give absolutely anyone, and I gave absolutely everyone, every single person who worked in my company, who worked in the companies where I worked, who interns, junior designers, even intermediate level designers who came and didn't know about guidelines, I recommend them to go and learn the material design guidelines and human interface guidelines. Material design guidelines for Google, for Android devices, and human interface guidelines for Apple devices. Why it's better to learn them? Because they provide a little bit different approach. They have different approach that have different specific, because Android devices have a little bit different, approach is the same. We sense everything through we experience everything through our senses. Through our eyes, we see exactly what's happening on the screen. Through our ears, some sound effects, if we have any. Then through our touch, so when I click on something, I can have a haptic feedback from the device, or it can be visual feedback. So when I click on the button, I see that it actually was pressed. And when you start understanding all these things, that we experience everything through our senses, voice is also one of the sense, and you're like, how can you sense something? Well, it's not the taste, but you can experience something when you say something. It can be voice UI. We'll not be talking in this course about voice UI because it's not about design in general. It's about Figma, and voice UI in Figma is presented only as scheme of questions and answers. Anyway, let's get back to our idea. So we experience everything through our senses. Usually when we design something like visual design, we experience everything through our fingers and through our eyes. And because of that, like Google understand that, Apple understand, every single platform understand that. By the way, Samsung, they have their own UI approach. Huawei, the Chinese companies and Korean companies who produce devices, they also have their own UI systems, UI guidelines. And if you keep them in mind, you will be able to deliver the best user experience to your users, because you will keep in mind the experience they already have interacting with this device that they're using. And why it's better to learn design guidelines? Well, because Google and Apple, they have a little bit different approach to design, and because of that, they provide a little bit different experience and idea. But also they measure some things a little bit differently. And when it comes to Google, for example, the touch area shouldn't be less than 48 by 48 points. This is the size of like about 0.7 centimeters, and this is the area of the finger. Apple, on the other side, requires you the touch area to be at least 48 by 48 points. A little bit smaller, but just they decided that this will be enough. Another thing that will be different is typography. By default, Android devices, for Android, when you're designing for Android, you use Roboto. When you're designing for Apple, you use San Francisco typefaces. This is the difference in typefaces, but also there is a huge difference in sizes and also the weight of the fonts that they're using. I recommend you honestly to go and check Material 3 design guidelines for Android and Human Interface Design guidelines for iOS, or not only for iOS, for Apple devices, because they include also macOS, tvOS, iOS, and watchOS. So you will learn everything there, and they will give you so much understanding of what is behind those components that they have by default in their devices. Also, when you design for Android or iOS, keep in mind that by default, the iOS design kit and Material 3 design kit that these companies provide to designers, they are based on them. You can see the result of these design kits in standard default applications that you have on your device. If you have an Android device, then you will see it differently from if you have an iPhone. And just if you compare setting screens, you will see what it is. What's the actual Android is and what the actual iOS is. When you go to system app, like general settings, and you will see the difference, the main difference between these two platforms. Again, keep in mind also that some platforms like Samsung, Huawei, they have different additional like wrapper, like a cover. They add additional UI on top of like default Android style. You can find the default Android style on devices like Pixel that are provided by Google. When I started designing mobile applications, I immediately understood that it's better to test your designs on real devices. If you're designing for Android, if you're designing for iOS, if you're designing cross-platform application, it's better to test them on both devices, so you understand the difference. And back then, my approach was, of course, to use the devices that the company provided to me. But when I started designing myself, and even when I continued working in companies, but in different companies, I just bought additional device for myself. I was a huge fan of Android. I already had Pixel 2. Then I bought iPhone. And later I updated my Pixel 2 to Pixel 4. And honestly, even if today you can find Pixel 7, Pixel 4 works perfectly, and it shows me exactly how pure Android works. So if you have an opportunity to find an additional device that is different from what you're using today, I mean, if you're using iPhone, find an Android. If you're using an Android, find an iPhone. Even if it will be old, like if it's old like iPhone 10, it will be perfect. It will show you exactly what you need, and you will be able to test your designs. But then this is we discussed the Android and iOS. But what about the mobile applications that are cross-platform, that people will be able to use and see on just no matter what phone they have? Well, in this case, my recommendation to you is to follow the approach like a combination. Take the best practices from material design guidelines and human interface guidelines. Understand what's the main difference in them, understand what the similarities are, and then create your application keeping those things in mind. And honestly, there are not so many differences, only the philosophy behind it. As I said, for example, when you are creating something for Android, you keep in mind material design approach. When you are creating something like Apple style, you're keeping in mind UI approach. What is UI approach? It's, well, as you know, all digital UI that we see today, the graphic user interface, GUI, that we see today, it came to digital world from physical world. And that's exactly, if you remember those days when skeuomorphism was pretty popular, well, the idea behind skeuomorphism came from physical world. And then little by little, because it was too overcomplicating things, little by little, every single company designer started changing the style from skeuomorphism to flat design first, and then to what we have today, material design and human interface design approach, where you see simplified version of a physical experience. And then, keeping these things in mind and keeping the mobile application anatomy in mind, you are able to design absolutely any mobile application, because the idea behind every single mobile application will be, well, not idea, but the anatomy will be the same. You will have system components, then you will have navigation, then you will have the body area with all the content inside of it, and the body area will have some components divided as sections that provide information to user, keeping in mind Gestalt principles. If you just can learn just only one thing about user experience, I recommend you to learn Gestalt principles and UX laws. Honestly, they called UX laws, but basically this is just how human psychology works. So take a look at the Gestalt principles and you will understand the law of proximity, for example, continuity, and then you will be able to divide sections, divide components, and you will understand why they're so different and where to use them, because they give you the feedback of how you interact with the system. And by the way, now the most important knowledge that you will get from this lesson: learn what is UI actually is. UI design is not just a visual, what you see on the screen. No, UI is user interface, is the system that allows you to interact, that allows a person, a human, interact with a machine. Remember that UI, user interface, is the system that allow you, a person, a human, interact with the machine. And by the machine, it can be mobile application, it can be TV application, it can be dashboard, infotainment system in your car. And through UI, through touching the screen, telling to the system something, dragging, pinching, you give information to the system. This is what I want to get from you. And the system will communicate you back some information. Like when you click on this button, you go to another screen. When you make zoom in, the system will scale the information on the screen. When you, for example, scroll, the system will show you what's at the bottom. And this is exactly how it works. You talk to a machine, and machine gives you the response, gives you the feedback. And it's important for a human to see the feedback from a machine visually, because then a person understands, oh, okay, now I have clarity on when I click on that, when I accomplish this action, I see this particular feedback from a machine. And this is why you see chips. This is why you see toast. I know that's from kitchen area, but this is how components, some of the components are called. And this is why when in the filters area you select some items, you see that they have pressed state, because this is the feedback of the system that, okay, I understood you. You press the button, you press that filter, so I will keep the state pressed until you click it again, or until you click reset all filters button. User interface is the communication between a machine and a human. And the way you present it, the visual style you present, called visual design. So basically what you see right now on this screen, on these three screens in front of you, on the screen that I'm showing to you, what you see three same UIs, three same user interfaces with three different visual styles. Same UI, different visual style. So when you're designing something custom mobile application, still keep this approach in mind, no matter what visual style you will choose, no matter what guidelines you will follow. Even if you break the guidelines, by the way, don't break the guidelines until you understand them. Learn the rules first and then break the rules when you need that. That will be the best approach rather than breaking the rules and then not understanding how to fix it or how to bring things back, or without understanding how to explain it to a client, to a manager, to other designers. Learn the rules. If you want to learn more about design principles, about design approach, about design in general, about UI, UX, and marketing and soft skills for designers, I'll be super happy to help you through one-on-one consultation, through mentorship, through UX UI coaching club. Just message me and we'll find the way how I can help you with those things. Now, let's dive into mobile apps design and let's start creating some components that you will be able to use in your mobile app design. But also I'll share with you some additional tips that will make your process much more efficient. You can't even imagine how much time I spent moving pixels and how much time I spent designing some things that honestly designers shouldn't design. They just have to take them from somewhere, like material design kit or human interface guidelines kit, iOS kit. Just take some system components there and it will save you hours, even days of your time. Well, we'll talk about it in the next lessons. Let's dive into design and start designing mobile application. Where to start from? Let's start with the design anatomy, like what a mobile application consists of. See you in the next lesson.